Nothing gets things done like us moms. I mean, we do. We make the world go round.
Because no one's coming to rescue us.
No, there's no Superman.
We got to address the suburban women problem because it's real.
Welcome to the Suburban Women Problem, a podcast from Red, Wine, and Blue.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jasmine Clark.
I'm Rachel Vindman.
I'm Amanda Weinstein.
And you're listening to the Suburban Women Problem. We've been talking about the rights push for parents' rights all year, and there are so many ways that manifests. Through banning books, banning sex ed classes, banning rainbow flags in classrooms. And another thing they don't want our kids learning about is race. Whether it's DeSantis banning AP African American Studies or the thousands of little ways that students of color are treated unequally every single day, we need to make sure we're providing a safe and equitable space for our students. So this week, I sat down with founders of School Board Partners, an organization that connects and supports anti-racist school board members across the country. And before that, we'll chat with Maya Guy, a mom in Virginia who ran for school board to stand up for the kids in her district. But before we get to all that, how are you guys and what's been blowing up our group chat?
Oh man, as you were saying that, I was like, Oprah was in my head going, you get a ban and you get a ban and you get a ban. Everyone here gets bans.
That's how it feels. It really does feel that way all the time.
It does.
There's a new ban every day. I'm like, oh man, we're banning that today. Like for a group of people that are like so anti-cancel culture, they like cancel everything.
Their freedom feels like I have less and less every day.
I know.
And it's so confusing to me. And
you have the freedom to do what they want you to do.
It's like they're 11 and 12-year-olds who are rebelling against like their parents' rules. I mean, honestly, I feel like my daughter could be leading this group. But unfortunately, it's adults. But I find it so interesting that it's states' rights, parents' rights, individual rights. Also, your children can only read the books that we think they should be able to read. You can only get the medical care that we think you should be able to get. And we are literally going to ban the rest. Not only can you cannot even choose to do these things because they will not exist.
You have the freedom to not have choices. That's pretty much like where they are.
Because it goes back to the Civil War. Like when they used
I was just going to say that.
Like,
yeah.
Like, come on. Like they've been doing this for centuries.
Yeah. As a Black person growing up in the South, when I hear the term states' rights, I definitely hear something probably very different than what some other people might hear. So I hear the right for a state to own my body and to use me for chattel slavery. Mm-hmm. Like that's what I hear when I hear states' rights. So I always have a connection to states' rights in a negative, it's like a negative visceral reaction whenever I hear it, because I feel like certain people say that and that's really where they're going with it. So this is actually reminiscent of that, right? When they're saying states' rights, they're saying I should have the right to control women's bodies the same way, and, in this state, the same way this state should have had the right to control Black people's bodies in the 1800s prior to the Civil War.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting point because as someone who was not raised in the South, right? When I hear what a state's rights should be, it's right. A state should have a right to set their system of governing, to talk about, their state legislatures, right? And so but that's what it should be. A state should have the right to take away fundamental individual rights that our Constitution guarantees us, right?
Speaking of states, and this is actually a really sad story out of Michigan State, Michigan State University, another mass shooting. And this time, we actually have students there that this is not their first mass shooting.
I mean, that broke my heart.
We are absolutely failing. All of us are failing. And it was so interesting, I think, because on the last podcast, we talked a lot about the stress associated with shootings. And this was actually before the shooting happened.
Right.
And then we see another one, which is so terrible that whatever we say about mass shootings will always be relevant. Until we change it. And it doesn't seem like we're making huge strides here.
So in my microbiology class, one of the things I do is I teach about microbial history and I talk about like when certain things happened. Like, for example, the first time someone discovered penicillin on a plate by mistake, it took 40 years before they actually said, oh, maybe we could use that as medicine. So a lot of times there's these long spans of time before we actually make a connection. And I feel like that with this, when you have students in college that were also in a highly publicized mass shooting when they were in elementary or middle or high school, that shows you that scale of time. And we don't think about these, to your point, Rachel, it's not that we don't think about them as connected, but I don't think we think about them longitudinally.
Exactly.
We don't think about them from the standpoint of it's been 20 something years or 18 years or however many years, and we're still doing the same things. And clearly whatever we were doing is not working because it's still happening and it's happening to the same people.
I think it leads to a huge generational disconnect. So I think for myself, right, and I was thinking about over my life, my connection with even gun violence. The first person that I knew that was my age that died of a suicide gunshot wound. And then the second person I knew that died that was my age died of a homicide, also through gun violence. I lived, an hour away from Columbine, right? So in my head, even these three things that were my first experiences with gun violence were pretty rare because it was over this span in my, of 10 years. But what feels rare to me, to kids today, is not as rare, right? If you look at the data, all of these incidents are on the uptick when you look at shootings, also suicides, and all gun violence, right? So now if we think about what it feels like for kids today, it doesn't feel rare. But for us, it might feel rare. And our grandparents, who many of the people leading this country are significantly older than us, to them, it feels exceedingly rare.
I know if I have one more 70-year-old tell me the story about how they used to show up to school with their guns in the back of their trucks, I'm like, why is that relevant?
Generational disconnect. Yes, they don't get it.
I saw a great TikTok video. I don't have TikTok, sorry, but I do sometimes watch videos. I know this is very controversial, but I was watching this video and it was this guy explaining about what's going on in Missouri. Like, why is there so much anti-trans legislation? And just in a nutshell, what he said was, we're at the bottom. We're like scraping the barrel, like 48, 49, 50 on all these different subjects. The top 5 elected officials in the government in Missouri are Republican. They're not giving anything to the people of Missouri, but they have to stay in power. So what do? They create a culture war. And that's what all these culture wars about. And it's really important to understand why. And Jasmine, I know you deal with this in Georgia.
Absolutely.
So creating the culture war creates like this illusion that they're doing something or fighting back against something. And
again, generational. So if you think, I feel like for older generations, they feel like suddenly now we have these woke politicians creating trans kids. They're like, no, the trans kids were always around. You just made them hide. And that's where it's like, I feel like hard for them to see. But I feel like kind of the opposite of this with generational thing is actually an abortion.
Yes.
Right. Where if you talk to especially older women, like, holy cow, they're like, I watched a friend who had a back alley abortion, right? I've seen this happen.
Right.
I have had to. So we had an older woman who's during her times as medical training, she had to treat a woman who had a back alley abortion and save her life. Like, I feel in this case, the older women are like, people, what are you doing? We should not go back. Like, I do not want my friends to die. This should not be something that the government is involved in.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Why do we think that is? Because I've had the same experience. I've had a lot of women, older women, tell me about their abortion experiences or their friends' abortion experiences, like a lot. So why do you think it is that that's the outlier?
I mean, it's a big population. If you think about abortions have been around as long as there have been women, FYI.
Yes.
And that we just had different ways of doing it. But now I feel like these older women can say, you know what? I can essentially, make up for this and I don't have to hide anymore. I had an abortion and here's why I had the abortion. And here is how this saved my life. And here's how it helped the children I had afterward. And I think that's really powerful for women who had to essentially be in hiding 50 years ago.
I 100% agree. I think that when we think about, for example, abortion, you have people that can connect the things that we are actually saying to real life events. Also, it wasn't that long ago, right?
No.
So like 1950s, it was not that long ago. Another thing that was not that long ago, but we're still talking about today, is how racism is a part of our education system. So when we talk about Brown versus Board of Education, like there are people walking around right now today, some of them in Congress that understand the ramifications. They were still around when Brown versus Board of Education happened. Ruby Bridges herself, she's actually on Twitter, I believe. Like
she's 68, which is bizarre.
I know. In our head, it seems like a long time ago.
Yeah. But so if she's 68, that means that the people who were yelling obscenities at her as she walked into that school,
they're still voting.
Yeah.
But that is a good point, because I wonder, so my grandparents, unfortunately, have now passed. But Casey's grandma's still around. But like, there are questions that I never thought to ask my grandparents. Like, what did you think when, Martin Luther King died? Like, I never asked that question of my grandparents. And now it's, lost to, eternity, that I don't know what they would have thought and what they would have said. But most white people actually didn't support Martin Luther King while he was alive.
Yeah.
And so if we're going by statistics, they probably didn't either. Just statistically speaking, they probably didn't, which is also the strength of when we talk about, diversity, equity, and inclusion and doing better by our kids. Like, it lets them feel better about themselves, like knowing that their parents or grandparents maybe made a decision they wouldn't.
Yes.
Man, doesn't that empower a kid to know, like, I can be better. I can be even better than our founding fathers were. Like, that's amazing. And that is something we deny kids by thinking they can't handle a conversation about race.
I could not agree with you more. There are things I've been open about that I was taught that I didn't really think about twice. I was probably too young to question it and kind of accepted it as fact.
I think that's natural. So even like, I think the education I got in Colorado was actually pretty good, especially talking to other people. I think it was actually pretty good. But even as an adult, I know there were big holes, especially regarding race. There were just holes. I had no idea that white people overthrew the government in North Carolina and Wilmington. No idea. That was not covered. The kind of white rage and the white reaction was not covered. It was, racism is bad and slavery is bad. And that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
We no longer do that anymore. And that was kind of so it felt like a long time ago. Like, to me, in the mind, the way that I was taught about history and slavery and racism was like, right, Ruby Bridges is in 68. She's 268, right?
Yeah.
That's how it kind of felt in my mind, because that's the way I was taught. But I know now there's a lot of holes of things that just weren't said and should have been said.
That reminds me of a conversation I had with my daughter because, Stone Mountain, Georgia is basically a memorial to the Confederacy. And it was one of the meeting places of the Klan here in Georgia. And I remember, I don't know what grade she was in, maybe 5th grade. And apparently they were learning about, this part of Georgia history. And my daughter is basically like, well, the Klan was. And I was like, well, they still try to meet every year. And she was like, what are you talking about? Our teacher told us that they don't exist anymore. That was back then. And I was like, yeah, no, I think that your teacher has a lot of wishful thinking. But the truth is, every single year they ask for a permit to do their little convening on top of Stone Mountain.
Wow.
I also had a bill that would make March 10th Harriet Tubman Day in the state of Georgia.
Love her. First woman ever to lead a raid for the military, by the way.
First woman, apparently first African-American woman to serve in the military, according to some sources.
Yes.
So this day would go in the special holidays section of our code. And so I just read through what all the other special holidays were as I was trying to make my case for why we should have this. And we legitimately have a Confederate History Month. It is like in our law.
Oof.
Okay, so I think this is a good time to bring in our guest for today. She is a mom in Virginia who ran for school board and won. Hi, Maya. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, this is actually not your first time on the podcast, but just to give our listeners a recap, could you tell us a little about what inspired you to run for school board?
I think I was inspired by a bunch of different things. I had been an education activist for about a decade in my community. And I'm just a doer. When I see a need, I jump in and do it. I had criticized my school board for never speaking out for Black children, if I'm being honest with you. We've seen so many things, but finally after George Floyd, I was like, you know what? You have a majority minority school system, and many of those students are scared and upset and in pain, and they never said anything. So I wrote an op-ed and it got published, and they didn't like it. And one of them said, if you think you can do better, shut up and run. I'm not going to run again. So you take my seat. And I said, okay.
Don't threaten me with a good time. Watch this.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, here we go. Maya, I have to tell you, there's something you said in season 1 when you were our guest that I think about all the time. I know you're a mom of 5 kids, and you talked about sometimes you ask your friends and your supporters that they have to miss out on some things. Maybe they miss out on a program or a game or something, but this is also something, supporting a good school board candidate who's doing the things that you're doing and standing up for those kids. That's also doing something for your children. And it really stuck with me. And there was actually a couple times when I went to school board meetings and I was like, but I feel like I should be home helping with homework or doing this other thing or just being home for dinner. And then I was like, no, this is important too. And I want to tell you, it was really inspirational to me. And I thought it was such an excellent point and something that we should remind ourselves of. But you are a mom of 5. How do you find the time to do this, to do the work you do?
I don't know. You just got to get stuff done. But my kids know they're not the center of the world.
That's a good lesson right there.
Yeah, I say I'm gonna miss it. I just saw your last 17 baseball games. I'm not gonna see this one. This is an important vote I want to go to, and you're gonna be fine. You have a dad. Lean into that. But 4 of my children are either in college or out of college. I have one that's in elementary school, and I can tell you, my adult children, they get it. And they're such good people, and they do for others. And I think it's because I have modeled for them that you're great. I love you, but I'm not gonna dote on every little thing you do.
That's such a good lesson for kids because it also teaches them how to take care of themselves, right? If you put everything to everyone else, they're going to do the same thing, right? And we don't want that for our kids. We want our kids to learn how to, take care of themselves too.
Maya, I wanted to ask you because, again, last time you were here, you were running for school board. Now you are on the school board. And so you have a little bit of experience now. So how can school boards actually address inequity in our schools? And do you have any success stories or any policies that you're working on?
Yeah, so school boards can address inequity by enacting equitable policies, right? Because that's what school boards do, right? They're the policy head. Unfortunately, that's hard for school boards who might have a majority on the board who think that equity is a dirty word. I know when I was running, they were dirty words, so much so that I took those out of my off of my flyers because it was a stopping point every single time. I didn't want to. A friend was like, "Hey, we keep getting stopped at this." I was like, "I know," and I was like, "Nope, I'm going to be me. I'm always going to be me. I'm not going to change." About a week later, I was like, if I change, I might be able to actually get more work done. Right.
Yeah, there's that balance.
And I just spelled out equity as opposed to using the word equity. I spelled out diversity. So it was still authentic. It was still me. It just took 20 more words. And the funny thing is the people who are pushing against equity love equity.
Exactly.
And so that's how school boards have to do it. And that's how you do it. You just spell it out. You don't use the buzzwords. You figure out what the buzzwords are and you still do the good work.
Love that. So if parents want to support policies that support equity in schools and policies that are anti-racist at their local school board, what's the best place for parents to start?
I think it's going to be different for each parent in each community, right? I think there's different avenues that parents can do. One of the things I did before I was on the board is I went straight to the superintendent. I did my research. I had my little PowerPoint. I had all the information that I could possibly find. And I was like, this is why you guys should do this. This is why you should do that. Or, for instance, one of the things that I was able to get us to do is we call it focus, screening for gifted and talented students. In my school system, about 15 years ago, it was all white kids, which is great. There's a lot of gifted white kids, but we're majority minority. So why are all the advanced classes white kids and not, why doesn't it look like the community? And so I went and did my research about how schools could screen for students and basically got them to implement screening every student. So that way there's no gatekeepers. And that starts in second grade.
Wow. So they didn't screen all students. It'd be like the teacher picking
No,
out as
exactly. The teacher picking out.
Would have
Which
no,
and the
idea.
teachers, sometimes we just have biases that we don't even know.
Yes. So I've also seen, like, even on gender, teachers often will actually evaluate a girl's math at a lower score than a boy's math without realizing that they're doing it.
Exactly. So if we give all the kids the same test, then we take away the gatekeepers, and that's something that we can do.
But implementing that and doing that research is so critical because, and I'm sure there are people listening to this who are in districts where they didn't even know this was a thing. And for you to go out and do that and bring that to your district, I'm sure it's undervalued, but that is huge, Maya. That is absolutely huge.
And it makes sense, right? Like saying it this way, like, okay, we have this program. We want to know who should be in it. So let's test everyone and use the same set of standards to figure out who should be in this program. When you say it that way, that makes a lot of sense. But it took someone actually saying that out loud for everyone to be like, oh.
Exactly.
Can I just also say really quickly, there are people on the opposite side of these issues that are doing just that. And they're doing it with a bullhorn and a, toolkit. That's what I'll call it, a toolkit.
Basically delivered to them, wrapped up talking points.
From very well-funded millionaires and billionaires. They are doing this. And because of that, we are getting a lot of bad policy. So people who are listening today, I hope that you hear Maya's story and you feel empowered to say, I can actually do this, but for good. I can do this to create a more equitable and just school system for either my children or the children in my neighborhood or, just my community as a whole. Do these things that you have the power to do this. And Maya is a prime example of that. She even went the next step and ran for school board.
And can I just say, you were a mom that saw an issue, right? You don't need a PAC and all the funding. And a mom who has a real issue is 100 times more powerful than a talking point someone heard on the news.
I agree. Because nothing gets things done like us moms. I mean, we do it. We make the world go round. We do everything, right?
Like you see something and it's just, okay. I mean, if this is what it is, I'm just going to roll up my sleeves and do it because no one's coming to rescue us.
No one is going to save us.
No, there's no Superman.
I love it. All right. Well, on that note, Maya, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
And now we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll have my interview with Ethan and Carrie of School Board Partners.
Extremist politicians and outside groups are attacking our kids' education with book bans. They've even tried to ban books about Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. One way you can stand up to these book bans is by reading and discussing frequently banned books like The Bluest Eye and The Hate You Give. And if you buy them through our new affiliate shop on bookshop.org, you can support books, independent bookstores, and the work of Red, Wine, and Blue. It's a win-win-win. You can find our shop by clicking the link in the show notes.
We have two guests joining us on the podcast today. Ethan Ashley and Carrie Douglas are school board members and the founders of School Board Partners, an organization that helps connect, inspire, and support anti-racist school board members across the country. Ethan and Carrie, thank you so much for joining me today on the Suburban Women Problem.
We're so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to have this conversation. I think we actually know some school board members in common, so I'm really excited to talk. We talk all the time on the podcast about school boards and how important it is to vote in school board elections, also attend school board meetings, and even encouraging our listeners to run for school board. But sometimes it's valuable to just take a step all the way back. So let's start here. What exactly is a school board and what do school boards do?
Thanks, Jasmine. It is such a great question. It is a question that the vast majority of people can't answer, including most new school board members.
Oh my goodness.
So we love to talk about this question. There are approximately 13,000 school boards across our country and about 100,000 school board members. And typically they have between 5 and 9 members, and decisions are almost always made by majority vote. And then the board sets the goals and visions for the district. They should be writing, passing, and monitoring execution of policies, but sometimes not a lot of that is happening. They approve the budget, which is typically hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. And finally, they should be communicating both directions with the community.
Yeah, I think, if you're going to sum that up, school board members are responsible for educating, the nearly 50 million public school students. And they make decisions about all these critical things, and they do so normally through policy. And so, if you think about discipline policies, curriculum used, or how teachers are placed, how they're paid, and so much more. I mean, board members are responsible for these things, and they make policies on these issues, and they're responsible for, educating our young people and improving their outcomes, experiences, and environments.
So let's talk about School Board Partners in particular. So you all were founded to support and connect anti-racist school board members. So how has race played a role in school boards historically and to this day?
Yeah, this is such an important question. And we address it briefly in our new report called Empty Seats at Powerful Tables, the State of School Boards in America. Everyone knows about Brown versus Board of Education, but we rarely acknowledge that it was individual school boards, thousands of elected leaders, that decided how to codify policies and practices across the country that really, I think, enshrined some of the inequality that exists today. Most people hear the Brown and they remember, they know that's somebody, but the Board of Education, it's a school board, and those are elected school board members. So following Brown v. Board, school boards enacted policies to continue de facto segregation rather than embracing integration and racial equity as intended by the law. They built on redlined communities to create segregated school district boundaries. They developed school finance systems that provided greater resources to the wealthiest and typically the whitest part of our communities. And they approved teacher contracts that sent most experienced teachers disproportionately to wealthier and whiter schools.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is that American public schools are grossly inequitable on literally every dimension. Students of color today still disproportionately attend under-resourced schools. They're more likely to be staffed by less experienced teachers. They're provided with less access to advanced courses. As a result of all of that, students of color are, on average, several grade levels behind their peers. That leads them to graduate from high school and complete post-secondary degrees at lower rates than those peers. And really, in short, we are not providing students of color the same caliber of education that we offer to white students. And the consequences of that echo truly throughout their lives.
Oh man, you're speaking to me. I actually have worked with a nonprofit where one of our goals is to just increase access to, extracurricular programs. I had the opportunity to both go to public and private school, and I noticed how certain programs were only introduced to certain students. And so a lot of parents and students don't even know the opportunities that they have available to them just because of the way that things are structured and who decides who gets to know what.
It's such a great example, Jasmine. I think it really speaks to the fact that some of these issues are really complicated and multifaceted. And we're talking about, trying to address generational poverty and housing and all these other issues. And then some other decisions that we make aren't that difficult, like the assumption that in the past, many AP courses and extracurriculars, we just waited for kids to sign up and we can imagine who signed up. And by intentionally acknowledging and addressing a fairly simple intervention, intentionally asking and supporting different students to access those is just an example of a fairly inexpensive, easy intervention that's simply a change to the way we've always done things.
Exactly. All right. So what experiences in your life led you to run for school board and then ultimately to found School Board Partners? And so, Ethan, I'm going to start with you. And then, Carrie, I'd love to hear your story, too.
Well, this is a great question. And I will say that there are probably many reasons that I got into the school board space. But I think the most important one is this. I went to 6 different elementary schools growing up, and my mother was a single parent mother who I love to death. She is the epitome of a Black queen, all the things. My mother was an educator. She was an early childhood educator, found herself divorced, raising 3 boys on a Head Start salary in the 80s. And, that experience was rough. And so, I just realized early on that education played a big part in creating better outcomes and opportunities. I had the opportunity to actually start college before I started high school. I went on to finish high school at 16. I then got my undergraduate degree and went on to law school and finished there at the age of 22. And, I think it was, that story, that truth of traversing through my educational journey and having had opportunities through the system that was provided through, school boards, through policy that allowed me to do that. And I had friends who didn't have the same opportunity. And so I knew that I wanted to dedicate my life to, doing really policy work in real respects. And school board was a great place to start. My grandmother was an educator. My mother was one. And I had the opportunity to run for elected office in school board and have had the opportunity to serve, for the last 7 years in the role. We started this thing called School Board Partners largely because before we started it, there wasn't a place to go when you were trying to figure out how to do the role of school board and do it with a lens on fighting for equality, with a focus on race. But our organization exists largely because there is a need to support elected school board members around the country to provide them with the support that they need to improve student outcomes, experiences, and environments for local families and students that they serve.
I love that. I love how basically your own experience in the world and your own upbringing kind of led you to this place. And I'm glad that you're here. So, Carrie, I'd love to hear your story too.
So I am a former teacher. I grew up in Bend, Oregon, where I am currently a twice elected school board member, and graduated from college and joined the Jesuit Volunteer Corps and went to be a volunteer teacher in Boston. And I lived and worked in a housing project on the Columbia Point Peninsula in Boston, where there was a very large, under-resourced, failing elementary school. And, for our listeners, if you are lucky enough to have your children attend a relatively high-performing, well-resourced school in America, it might be hard to imagine how that is not the story for many students in America. The school was falling apart. The students were using textbooks that were decades old. And I was teaching at a small urban Montessori school, tuition free, serving the same students, but in a much better environment. And in particular, I lived next to a family with 2 boys, and one of them, through the luck of the lottery, got to attend my school, and one of them was relegated to the failing school down the street. And I just watched these 2 lives of these boys, their life trajectory changed. It diverged that year. They were in kindergarten and first grade, and one of them was getting suspended and discouraged from school, and one of them was in an environment where he was able to thrive. And so here I was, a brand new teacher, hadn't really ever even thought about the system. I was just there to teach my students, but kind of came face to face with this institutional racism. I didn't understand it to be that at the time, but knew that it wasn't right. And so I really spent the next, 15 years of my career as a teacher and school leader and district leader and nonprofit leader, really trying to figure out, like, how is it that we allow something like that to occur and persist? And then really following the election of Trump in 2016, like many people, I was frustrated with politics and decided I should stop complaining and do something about it. And so the natural thing was to run for school board. But as I said earlier on the podcast, I had no idea what school board members actually did. And 2 things happened. One, all these policies started coming across the dais that were the policies that I had been trying to change and advocate for all those years, and realized, oh my gosh, I'm finally in the seat where I can just make the change. I don't have to advocate to someone else. I can change it. And number 2, I have no idea how to do that. I don't know how to write policy. I don't know how to be an effective politician. And so, as Ethan said, we really founded this organization to provide what we were both looking for, which was, an organization to help us be effective at dismantling a system that just isn't working for far too many kids.
I love that. I think a lot of us, when we first get elected, we have this moment where, especially if you got elected after kind of being an advocate or advocating on behalf of a population or a community, you have this moment where you're like, oh, now I'm here and I got to switch. I've got to change the volume knob and go from, advocacy and activism to governing and governance. And I don't think that people realize how dramatic of a switch that can be, because you're so used to asking for something, and now everyone is asking you for the thing that you've been asking for. And it can be a bit of a jolt to feel like, oh, I'm in a position where now I'm the one that's being advocated to for things.
Yeah. And it's absolutely, there's holes at every aspect of the pipeline. There's not enough organizations recruiting folks to run. There's not enough organizations helping folks be elected, but there's even fewer organizations helping folks after they're elected to actually govern well.
Very good point. So my next question is for those who are listening to the podcast today, and they want to know how they can get involved and support anti-racist policies at their local school board. Where is a good place for them to start? Because a lot of our listeners, that's what they want to know. All right, now that I know what the problem is, how can I help?
The good news is that it's fairly easy to get started. We would recommend that step 1 is just find a friend and go to a school board meeting. You don't have to talk. You don't have to do anything. You can even watch it virtually, but just to get a sense for what's happening. What are they talking about? And ask yourself, are they talking about issues that seem important and relevant to me as a parent or community member? That's kind of the first question to ask yourself. The second recommendation we would make is to email your school board members or go and talk at public comment. I think people really underestimate the power that has. And we always say a small handful of people speaking up about an issue, emailing a school board, coming to speak at public comment can really change the trajectory of the conversation. So don't underestimate the power of that.
Yeah. I think if you are deeply interested in learning about where your district is on the metric of being anti-racist, we have an anti-racist school board rubric on our website. And so you can go to our website and be able to click on that. It'll allow you, once you've gone to a board meeting, you've had the opportunity to review and basically rank your district, see where you all land on the rubric. I think just remembering that some of our board members, particularly our board members of color, are first generation elected officials and they need support. So, if you can support them, and the best way to go support folks is don't forget to vote, particularly down ballot. School boards are forgotten. They're forgotten sometimes. I don't like to feel like we're a forgotten elected official, but sometimes we are forgotten. So definitely vote down ballot.
I love that. I love two things you said. Number one, vote down ballot. I will also mention in some states, the school board elections aren't in the same election as the general election. So make sure to vote in those quote off year elections. And the second thing I love that you said is just support school board candidates. The big top of the ticket races, the governor and, Senate and Congress, they can rake in like millions of dollars for their campaign. Meanwhile, these local races, city council, school board, things like that, they're struggling to just get tens of thousands so they can run an effective campaign and reach out to all of the people that they would like to vote for them. So those are two very important things. But before we go, we always like to ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. So are y'all ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, first question. What's your favorite thing about being a parent?
Beyond being able to use excuses to not go to things, which is great. I'm going to say loving, learning, and accomplishing all over again, but through the lens and eyes of my beautiful children.
I would say my girls' humor and their naive brilliance. My 5-year-old the other day, said, "Mom, if cigarettes and guns are bad for us, why do we make them?" And it just, reminds me of how we can hopefully depend on our young people to save us.
I love that. Very good question she asked. I'm with her on that one. All right, next question. If you could go back to school and take any class, not for credit, but just to take it, what would it be?
Anthropology.
Oh, anthropology. I like it. Ethan?
Oh, I'm going coding all the way.
Coding. Yeah. I can do a little bit of coding, but basically I just copy and paste someone else's code and figure out what each thing means. And then I make it do that on another page. That's the extent of the coding that I can do. All right. Next question. If they made a movie of your life, who would you cast to play yourself?
I am going to say, I'm going to put this out in the ether. So if you know him, just go ahead, let him know Ethan is looking for him. I'm going to say Michael B. Jordan. I'm going to go ahead and put that out there. Come on, Michael.
I like it. I wish I knew Michael B. Jordan, to be honest, but no, I don't. Maybe our producers do, but I don't. Carrie?
Love it. I'm going to say Jennifer Lawrence, and specifically channeling her in the Hunger Games, because we are in the arena and trying to save the world.
I love it. I don't even know how I would answer these questions. All right. So that is actually the end of our rapid fire questions. Y'all did a great job. So where can people go to find out more about school board partners?
Yeah. As Ethan said earlier, our website is www.schoolboardpartners.org. We also would love for you to read our really groundbreaking report, which can be found at emptyseats.com. As Ethan said, the state of school boards in America.
Awesome. Well, this was an absolutely great conversation. I just want to thank you so much for joining us on the Suburban Women Problem.
Thanks for having us.
Welcome back, everyone. Jasmine, thank you for that interview. I think it's really important to note that, when we start something and we're in that honeymoon phase, I think every phase of something is important, but that's when you really understand your power. You also understand the scope of work, but you know that you have a chance to make a difference. I mean, just like Maya told us, you just got to roll up your sleeves and do it.
It was so real when I was talking to them, because I went through the same thing. I went through this thing of like, okay, now that I'm elected, what next? And I think a lot of people really don't understand what the school board does. They just don't. You just know you want to make a difference, and you want to make a difference in the schools. And so you're like, I'm going to run for school board. And then bam, you're there. And you're like, okay, now what do I do?
Yeah.
All right. So I think now is a good time to transition to the Toast to Joy, where we talk about something great that has happened to us in our week. And Rachel, I will start with you. What is your Toast to Joy this week?
My Toast to Joy this week is getting ready for my last military move. When you retire, you get one more move, and we've extended it for a couple of years. They do let you do that till you make some big decisions about your life. If you had to suddenly retire because the president ruined your career. Oh, wait, I don't think that's everyone, but the policy is very inclusive. So I've forgotten what it's like to move, and I've had some rude reminders, but as I used to say with every move, I mean, in 3 days, it's going to be over, whether I have everything perfect and prepared or not.
I'm feeling stressed out listening to it right now. Like just listening to it, I'm feeling a little bit stressed.
So my dear friend and neighbor who's a military spouse came over, and she was just like, remember, you're in the worst part of it right now. Because every military spouse the stages, and the worst part. And this, before the movers come, is the worst part. But we're excited to start something new and begin a new chapter. It's been a long time coming. I mean, we've had different starts, but this feels like the last and probably the biggest new, fresh start. And definitely not giving this date away yet, but I will just say there's a lot of opportunity there for me to do good
Lots
work.
of work to be done.
They know where I'm moving. Yes. Stay tuned. Dun, dun, dun. So, Amanda, what is your Toast to Joy?
So my Toast to Joy is actually to some of the opportunities that we do get to have with Casey being in the State House are pretty amazing. And so we actually got a personal tour of Cincinnati's Holocaust and Humanities Center, which is a really, really important museum. It's super meaningful. The way they did it, I just really liked. And so they connected kind of the Holocaust to the question of not what would I have done, but what am I doing right now?
Oh, I like that.
And that's how it starts. And so the whole museum is about, here's all the characteristics to be a leader. And there's, tens and, 20 characteristics where you might spot something in each, especially like if you're a younger kid, to see like, I have the characteristics of a person who can be, they call it an upstander, of somebody who stands up and does something about this thing. And then they also connect it to other issues. So they connect it to civil rights and racism and LGBTQ issues. And so it was really, really cool to see this.
Oh, that's an important through line.
Mm-hmm. I highly recommend it. And it's actually in an old train depot in Cincinnati. So it was actually a place where a lot of Holocaust survivors came through that train depot, and a lot of immigrants came through that train depot, and a lot of Black people coming from the South actually came to that train depot when they were fleeing the South and the Great Migration to come up north. So it's this place where you have all of these things that was like so historical that happened in our nation. So to kind of have it in that place was amazing. So I was really appreciative that we got to do that. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, it was super fun.
Yeah, that's such a great way of making. I don't think we need to make the Holocaust relevant. I think it's incredibly relevant, but I think we need to tie it to other things.
Right.
When we say never again, we don't just mean the Shoah. We mean everything. We mean that no one is treated and othered like this. And it doesn't have to be that 6 million die. Othering people leads to really bad things, and we have to prevent it all the time. And wow, I'm going to have to go to that museum. I love relating those two things.
So the other thing they did that I really liked was they had stories from Holocaust survivors who lived in Cincinnati. And they also had accounts of people who liberated camps who lived in Cincinnati and in Ohio. So it's really this local connection to where you can see it's not some story that happened a long time ago to someone I don't know. It's to, oh, this man lived down the street from me and actually is still alive. And they also did this really cool thing with AI where they recorded a Holocaust survivor. And with AI, you can ask her questions that she didn't answer, and the AI will kind of give you the answer that it thinks she would say based on everything she said. So I actually asked this Holocaust survivor through AI, like, how do we prevent the next Holocaust? And it was not something they actually asked her. And what she said was, talk to each other. And it was really cool to see like the reaction of like even the people there who said, you know, that wasn't a question she was asked, but that was what the AI assumed her answer would be to my question, which is a really neat way. They've tested with children and adults. Children and adults feel more free to ask an AI a question than they do a real Holocaust survivor, which I thought was so. At first, the museum director, the museum director was like, oh, I don't know if we should do this. Like, we have Holocaust survivors, but then they did this test to see, like, we actually asked them more questions and more in-depth questions. So it was cool all around. Highly recommend. All right, Jasmine, what is your toast to joy?
So my toast to joy is to doing fun things in new places. So I had the opportunity to go to a convening of people in different justice spaces of reproductive rights, environmental rights, voting rights, all convening in one place. And I got to go to Phoenix, and that is just a little bit of the toast. That's like half of the toast. The real toast part is that I got to go horseback riding. And I went with my daughter, and it was so fun. Aww. And the interesting thing was we were all on these horses, and the horses move in a herd. So it wasn't like a trail where they're like one long line. They kind of herd together. But my daughter was always in the front the whole time.
She's a leader. The horse knew.
It was just interesting just to watch her. You know, she's 14, and we are starting to have these conversations about the world. And I always wonder, like, is my daughter going to be a leader? Is she going to be? And I think there's space for all different types of people, but she just like goes into the world so fearless. And I just really enjoyed watching that, you know, from afar and getting to see that moment. And I mean, after we were done, I was like, were you scared? And she was like, no, that was amazing. I want to do it again. So yeah, I guess to maybe raising the next generation of leaders, and maybe my little girl might be one of them. So
here.
That would not shock us if she was. We'd be like, that makes sense.
All right. Well, thanks so much to everyone for joining us today. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with someone you know. And we'll see you next week on another episode of The Suburban Women Problem.
The Suburban Women Problem was created by Red Wine and Blue. Our executive producer is Beverly Batt. Our producer and editor is Amy Thorstensen, and our project manager is Lindsay Quist. Videos by Abigail Martin and Ashley Hufford. For more information about upcoming events and trainings, or to learn more about Red Wine and Blue, follow us on social media or at www.redwine.blue.